Hello there. Welcome to the Ebon Hawk, a podcast discussing Star Wars news and Knights of the Old Republic. Today we get off of Taris and talk about your Canderous Ordo fancasts. Spoiler alert for the Knights of the Old Republic series and the Star Wars films and TV shows. This is where the "we are finally fricking getting off of Taris" begins. Alright, so before we get started, back in episode 32, we kind of talked about the score of KOTOR and some of the songs that reminded us of Knights of the Old Republic. So we're getting around to the listener responses to the question, what songs remind you of KOTOR and why? And Astro Not Cut Art said, when we talked about a male Revan, I remembered one song which I strongly associate with him. It's in Russian by a band called Arktida. The song Pozvid is named after a Slavonic god of bad weather and storm. I especially like that in this strophe, with my great power, strength and power, there is the exact word which is used for force in Russian. And the part with a clear day doesn't cope with me is very shippy. I kind of liked getting that response because I'm not really too familiar with Slavonic or Russian songs, so sometimes it's just nice to hear from fans in other parts of the world.
I also kind of like how it's just kind of like obscure compared to some of the other ones that are going to come up where they're a bit more mainstream. So I thought a lot of kind of thought came behind that one.
And then Ironic Dot Design says the Game of Thrones soundtrack has a timeless theme with similar vibes to Star Wars. And Raman Djwaldi, I think that's how you pronounce his name, he did the Game of Thrones soundtrack. I do like the soundtrack they used for Game of Thrones, and I've come across his scores in Clash of the Titans and The Great Wall, and I do think it has a good score and kind of a medieval fantasy kind of sound.
For a mainstream pick, that was pretty good.
And then the Order of the Jedi says SWTOR main theme. So I am more familiar with the version that Samuel Kim put out, but what about you?
I don't know. I do like the music of SWTOR with a lot of the earlier Star Wars projects too, though. Like they don't stray too far from the regular Star Wars formula. And so when you do hear something from SWTOR, you do get kind of that Star Wars vibe. So yeah, I'd agree with that.
Yeah. And then Jedi Aimer Tall says the Bastila and Revan theme, which I think that Samuel Kim put out, which is kind of a more orchestral sound and an emotional sound to the Bastila theme. And then she also adds, I love Upper City Terrace too. So vibrant, and it's a good one.
Yeah, I thought with a lot of the overworld themes, so kind of outside the more combat centric, but most of the overworld themes from the original KOTOR are just really great, kind of like ambient additions to the gameplay of KOTOR.
Yeah. So we always love getting your responses, and maybe in the future, I'll remember to specify like what non-Star Wars or KOTOR songs remind you of KOTOR and why, because that's what I was kind of meaning, but we loved all the responses. So, all right, let's just take a quick break, and we will talk about getting off of Taris.
All right, well, it's about time. We've been covering Taris for a few episodes now.
Yeah. So in case you're at home wondering how we got here, when we last left off our recap of KOTOR, we defeated the bad robot and the Sith governor in the Sith base, and we got the launch codes. And then you meet Canderous Ordo at the Javiar's Cantina, and he mentions Canderous, of course, works for Davik's estate, and it's kind of interesting because after you meet Canderous, there is a cutscene, and it's just like a beak-like ship, which is like the Sith, kind of like their flagship, I would say. It just looks ominous, and it definitely evokes the Imperial Star Destroyers. And that ship just looms over Taris, and Admiral Karath is there, and Malik is overlooking the planet of Taris out of his window. Malik says the search is taking too long. The search for Bastila is taking too long. We cannot risk her leaving. So he says to Karath, like, destroy the planet. Karath is kind of like, wait, what? Like, you want me to bomb, like, an entire planet? And Malik's like, did I stutter? You're gonna do it. And it's like, okay, well, we'll get it ready, you know? So that hammers home that you need to get off Taris. And the editing in this is interesting. It would be interesting to cover in a movie, because we're seeing something that Revan and Bastila don't really know. So I think that's a cool detail. Then you get to Davik's estate, and Canderous is introducing you. It's kind of like he is your contact, and it's hilarious because Davik is like, yes, I keep my Ebon Hawk ship, the Ebon Hawk, in the garage. I have the codes. And it's just, I'm like, thank you, Davik, for telling me everything I need to know.
Is this a plot device?
It is a plot device. And it's kind of hilarious because he's like, okay, we're going to complete that background check. You stay in your room. You're totally not a prisoner. But if you leave, I'm going to be very upset. So don't leave, you know, or go anywhere. And it's like, yeah, you know what? I'm not going to stay in this room. So
it's like in Final Fantasy VII when Aerith tells you have to stay in your room, and then you try and sneak out, and if you bump any of the pots, then she sends you back.
I played Kingdom Hearts, just not the Final Fantasy. But what is funny is there is a room in Davik's estate when you get out. It has mounted heads in it, and it's kind of like it contains like all the creatures' heads that you'll see in the game. It has a Rancor head, Kinrath, and everything. So I thought that was a cool little Easter egg they threw in. And if you remember in The Mandalorian, I think they mentioned the Twi'lek pleasure baths. That Davik's estate has one of those. And Davik has an interesting sense of decor. There's a lot of purple and white. And one of his rooms, it just has a huge throne. So I'm like, is this just where he sits down and like rules the Tarisian underworld? So
yeah, I don't know if that's like a historical reference of like wealth, because purple in kind of like the medieval days was really expensive to manufacture. So I don't know if maybe they were kind of going with that kind of vibe there.
Yeah, traditionally it was the color of royalty because it was a very hard dye to produce. Usually they would have to, I think it was the color purple is associated with royalty because as far back as like ancient Greece and Rome, I want to say, like the classical age, the color, the pigment came from, I think, a shellfish or something, and it was just very hard to obtain, so that's why it was only royalty had it. So, and like up through now, and like, as he said, like the Middle Ages, like throughout history, purple has been associated with royalty. So I think also Davik's armor is purple too. So he must just love purple, you know? So it was an interesting detail. So how I got the codes to the Ebon Hawk is I freed the pilot out of a torture cell, and then the bombing begins. Callow and Davik, I kind of wonder if they knew that the attack was imminent, and they were kind of just locking up everyone else, and they were just going to leave themselves. Then you fight Callow and Davik, and the fight can go different ways. Like, it can be a hard fight, but sometimes, like, Davik will just instantly be hit by the Sith, like, kind of like the bombing. Like, there's just some random hits, you know? So he'll just die. And then there's a cutscene with Callow, and he has a thermal detonator, and he says, "I'm taking you all with me." But then, like, some rubble falls from the ceiling, and he gets crushed under it. But one thing I wonder is, like, how does he get off? Because he canonically dies on Tatooine. But I'm just kind of, like, wondering how he managed to get a ship and leave, and how he got out from underneath the rubble. But how do you think he got off?
Probably similar to how the party gets off in Rogue One, where he just kind of like scrambles to the nearest thing that can fly and just kind of last second books it out of there.
Yeah, the garbage will do. That's actually not Rogue One, like I was just referencing.
There's a problem on the horizon. There's no horizon.
There is no horizon. Yeah. So, but the garbage will do is a reference to The Force Awakens. So.
Yeah, that.
Yeah.
Whatever.
Yeah. So you can loot Davik and just watch out for the stray bombs. Well, not bombs, but like bullets. Like the bombardment is happening and you can get hit. But one cool detail is, like, if Bastila is in your party, because you have to have Canderous in your party, and then I just like having a lightsaber, so my party there was Canderous, Revan, and Bastila. She'll heal the party as you're leaving. And one word of wisdom I will give you is save your game after you've looted Davik, and just save it, because you're going to get into a little bit of a dogfight, and if you die you have to do that fight over again, and it's annoying to have to do that again, so just save it. But one hilarious detail is it asks you, if do you wish to board the Ebon Hawk, and then it's like, why would I stay, you know, like when the planet like is getting bombed. So I'm like, do I want to board the Ebon Hawk? I'm like, yes, you know. You pick up your friends, and then you have to go back and like pick up your friends in the apartment, and then you leave. And I kind of think, like, in an adaptation, like, that would just slow you down. So I think, like, what I would do is just maybe like have the others sneak in, or maybe the whole group was going to join the exchange. But yeah, so the bombardment ruins Taris forever in canon and in legends. And that quote that Darth Malak has, "Wipe this pathetic planet from the face of the galaxy," was in the KOTOR trailers, and I just think it's like kind of iconic, I would say. And it's just cool how he just like gestures like with his arm to like just go at it and like wipe it out.
It kind of brought the first visual of the purpose of the large Sith Wedge cruiser, because before the Sith cruisers came out, we knew about these Star Destroyers, but we've never seen like what a Star Destroyer is actually meant to do, which is to occupy a planet and orbital bombardment if necessary. But this is kind of the first example where that's actually done in a Star Wars setting. So like yeah, it was just kind of neat to kind of connect that dot for what that cruiser is meant to do.
Yeah, this is kind of like the Death Star before the Battle of Yavin. Like, Sith just love to destroy things because they're just so much about control that they don't really let things grow or live, you know? And I just think it was cool to kind of see, and it kind of reminds me of Iron Man 2 in a way, which, just the quote, Tony's dad, he says, "I'm constrained by the technology of my time," and I can maybe just imagine Darth Malak saying, like, "I want to destroy the planet, but I'm just so constrained by the technology of my time." So, because I think in the new canon, like, Sith have always been trying to learn how to use kyber crystals to destroy. So, it's interesting that the advent of, like, Rogue One, you kind of just learn more and more about, like, that it's just really dark-sided to destroy a planet. So,
yeah, like it's not
cool.
enough to rip an atmosphere off of a planet by plasma glassing the whole place. They want to completely obliterate it from existence.
Yeah. So, that's evil, kids. Don't do that. You're setting in a course for Dantooine, but as you're doing that, some Sith fighters come after you, and it's very evocative of Luke has to get into the turrets of the Millennium Falcon to shoot the TIE fighters, you know, while Karth and Bastila are piloting the Ebon Hawk to go to Dantooine as they're plugging in the course. You have to get in the turrets, and you have to shoot the fighters, and, like, I always struggled with that as a kid, and even now, I'm just like, okay, I'm trying to shoot it, you know? So, it took a few times, but then once you beat it, you get to go to the next planet. So, yeah, Karth is a pilot, because, you know, Star Wars always needs more pilots of ships like the Millennium Falcon, you know? And then Bastila is the co-pilot. And yeah, in a future episode, we'll cover how we would handle getting off of Taris and how much Taris to feature cinematically in a future episode. And we'll also discuss, like, which planets to feature and in what order if we would change anything. So, because it'll be interesting to tackle, like, because in some ways I think KOTOR, you can switch some things around, but then I also think some things should be constant. But what do you think?
You know, with the planets, you really can tackle that in any order you really want. I don't think that it would matter if you went against the canon order on the planets, but I do think that something would have to be simplified a little bit on what planets are featured, because there is a lot, and that is a lot of runtime, so that would make a pretty long second movie in a trilogy. Just from all the traveling, I think. And so if they were to maybe narrow it to, instead of, like, finding the different pieces of the puzzle, to just narrow it to, like, one piece, maybe. I don't know. It's kind of hard to tell, because I think there's a lot of really good stuff from each planet, but just kind of the overall of trying to find, like, this one puzzle piece on each planet would just get a little tedious. So I think Dantooine for sure, but the other ones, it's pretty tough.
Yeah. So we'll tackle that in a future episode, because I think it does take some care, you know? And you want to have, like, the best movies possible. And sometimes people, like, if you change anything from a video game or a book, when you're adapting it into a movie, some fans get very offended very quickly. But I think there's a difference between, like, plot and hair color. And sometimes if a character's hair color changes, that's not really affecting the plot, you know? But yeah, sometimes changes need to be made to make a better cinematic experience. And I think that can work out well, sometimes not as well, but we'll tackle it, and we'll see what you think. So, our next topic, we were going to talk about Canderous Ordo fan casts, but before we do, we're just going to take a quick break. So we got a lot of ideas for some Canderous Ordo fan casts. So first off, we have Star Wars _Revan.2. Josh Brolin, yeah, mine is generic. Ambitious Cuz says, I would cast Josh Brolin as this Mandalorian bad A. And then _Sereni says, oh, the guy who played Thanos, maybe. So yeah, Thanos is played by Josh Brolin. Do you think Josh Brolin would make for a bad A Canderous, or do you think it'd be a little bit generic?
I just think it's a wrong fit. But I don't know. It's like here we go, we're picking a mainstream actor for a role. I just kind of feel the same way with anybody pulled from like the Marvel Cinematic Universe or from the HBO shortlist.
Yeah, I mean, I kind of chose, like, my shortlist for Evan were all people from the MCU, so maybe I have no room, to say anything. But I think Josh Brolin is a good fit in, like, Deadpool 2 and Dune. Just maybe not quite for Knights of the Old Republic, but, I always am happy to be proven wrong. And then this is followed by Sicknick. Dolph Lundgren would make a good Canderous. The voice is gruff enough. And then Paul _Kala says Dolph Lundgren. The gray hair is perfect, I think. So what do you think about him?
The only thing that I recognize him from is The Expendables.
No, he's Swedish.
Like, I don't think it's a bad pick. The one thing that I don't know gets a little in the way for me is when the accent is really thick, and which his is, and so that can be a little bit distracting. But I don't know. I don't really know him in a lot, so I'm not going to shoot that one down.
Yeah, I think it's a good one. Maybe not the perfect fit, but I think it is a good fit. Like, I wouldn't mind him being cast. And for me, Swedish accents, I love them. So I'd be okay with it.
Like, I'm not saying anything like mean about the Swedish accent. I'm just like, when it's that thick, it's for a character that's going to be sticking around a while, it can be a bit distracting.
So J. Marie Athletic says, I can't remember his name, but the dude from Hellboy is the obvious choice. Then Rossi Nossi says Ron Perlman. Pumpkin Fingers says 1990s Ron Perlman. And then Ironic.Design says, I'd say Clancy Brown or Ron Perlman. Maybe Idris Elba. And I like that Pumpkin Fingers says 1990s Ron Perlman, because I think 1990s Tom Cruise would have been the perfect Nathan Drake. But
or a Nate Fillion.
Uncharted didn't exist then.
Nate Drake too.
Oh, I think Nathan Fillion is a bit too old, and it would be a little bit too perfect. Like, kind of just like, for me, it's kind of like saying Keanu Reeves is Revan. But, I mean, a lot of people like that, but for me, it's too obvious.
Have you seen that mock trailer with Nathan Fillion playing Nathan Drake?
Yeah, he made it himself.
Yeah, I thought it was awesome.
He tried to make that happen. For me, it was a little bit too sloppy, but, this isn't an Uncharted podcast. So,
yeah, here we are sidetracked, but I thought that was cool.
Yeah, but Ironic.Design says Clancy Brown. Clancy Brown has already been in The Mandalorian, so I don't think that would happen. But Idris Elba is an interesting choice. I mean, I kind of suggested him for Karth, but maybe he could be a good Canderous, but I kind of just want to see Idris Elba be given like a straightforward heroic role for once, because I think he's just kind of cast as villains too much.
Or like a misunderstood hero, kind of like his role in Pacific Rim.
Yeah, and I mean, Canderous, I think, through the KOTOR series, like through Knights of the Old Republic 2, you kind of see more of him and that he protects his people. So I guess he kind of gets more nuance later on. But I kind of just wonder if there's enough nuance. I just want Idris Elba to have a straightforwardly heroic role. But what do you think about Ron Perlman?
I actually don't like Ron Perlman that much. Like if we were kind of going into the like an 80s or 90s Ron Perlman, like if we're kind of doing that kind of cast, then maybe. But he's a bit like too anti-hero in my opinion. Like as a typecast kind of pick out. That's kind of what I see in Ron Perlman. Like either like major, like far, like chaotic anti-hero or more of just a villain role.
I mean, Ron Perlman for me, I mean, he does look like Canderous, but I think it's just not quite the right fit for me,
Yeah. And I've never seen Hellboy, so that like I don't see that picture like some of these have. Some of our guests have kind of pointed out kind of the pick from Hellboy is kind of their image of it, and so I don't quite really, I've never seen that, so I don't really know what that is about.
Yeah, I'm familiar with Ron Perlman from other things, so yeah, I mean, maybe it's just not my choice, but I can see why others would choose that. And then Star Wars _ negotiation says, we all know Danny DeVito is the only option. And, I mean, he is the only option. So, what do you think?
I have nothing to say to that. I think that was hilarious, though.
Yeah, I mean, some people suggested her for some people have suggested Danny DeVito for Bastila, but maybe he could play both roles, It could be very compelling.
Just do a whole Danny DeVito cast where he plays all the characters.
That's really the best thing I've heard in all of our episodes. So, yeah, let's make it happen. And then Star Wars Doctrine says Arnold Schwarzenegger.
It would be nice to see Arnold in something other than Terminator, but he's really old now, so...
He's kind of old, very typecast, and I think if you have him, people would just say, hey, it's Arnold Schwarzenegger, So, yeah, probably not. And I'm guessing he costs a lot of money.
And to go back on my extremely thick, distracting accent point, that's another great example.
Coden just hates Europe, so...
Unless they're British brunette, then they're fine.
Oh, great. All right. And then Galactic _ artwork says Alfred Molina, which is an interesting pick. I kind of see if Alfred Molina was going to play anyone, I would maybe have him be Calo Nord or someone on the Jedi Council. But what do you think?
Yeah, I agree with the Calo Nord pick.
Then Astro Droid says, okay, now knowing that he's supposed to be 58. Side note, Canderous is 58 in Mandalorian years, whatever that means. So
planets orbit stars at different rates. It's probably true.
Yeah. So Astrodroid says, okay, now knowing that he's supposed to be 58, I'm going to throw out Jason Statham as my pick and Ken Watanabe as my alternate pick. And I'm not opposed to Jason Statham. I think he's a little typecast. He plays one type of character. I would say it's adjacent with Canderous. It wouldn't be bad. It wouldn't be like the best of all worlds, but it wouldn't be horrible in my opinion. And Ken Watanabe would be very interesting, and I would like that a lot.
Yeah,
so, what do you think?
No, so he comes from we've seen him in a few things like Inception and things. I'd be okay with him being cast in a role like that.
So, who are some of your fan casts?
So I must really want Stephen Lang in a KOTOR film because that was my pick, and I know I picked him out for one of the earlier members or one of the earlier characters from our cast picks, but I just can't get the that that little press meeting at the beginning of Avatar out of my mind for the kind of like putting the two and two together for Canderous. So there we go. That's my pick.
And then my top pick is Nikolai Coster-Waldau. And I know for the most part I probably only pick like MCU actors and people who have been on Game of Thrones, but for him, I think he would be the right age. Kind of has some gray hair, not all the way gray. Like, he'd be able to kind of be different from Karth, like not as old, but still full of life, you know, and could hold his own in a fight. And I think he would have a good voice and a good, like, warrior-like build. And I was very impressed with his run as Jaime Lannister in Game of Thrones, and I think he's probably not as well known as some of the actors and actresses in Game of Thrones, where I don't think it would be quite as distracting if, like, Kit Harington or, like, you know, Emilia Clarke was in Solo, you know? Mm-hmm. I think he would fit in, and he would have a distinctive voice for Canderous, and I'm just a fan of him as a person and as an actor, and part of me even would like to see him play Odysseus if they ever made like the Odyssey.
But hey, if Pedro Pascal wants to be a Mandalorian without his mask, we could cast him in there too.
I think that would confuse everyone, because then they would be like, wait, is he a clone? Like, is this 4,000 years? But you know, if Pedro Pascal wants to be in, like, who are you to say no? Thank you for listening to the Ebon Hawk. You can find us on Instagram at the Ebon Hawk Podcast on Instagram. And then our podcast, the Ebon Hawk, can be found on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and Google Podcasts, as well as everywhere else that Anchor Podcasts are distributed. Subscriptions, reviews, and shares help us out immensely. And you can reach us at ebonhawkpodcast@gmail.com. You can email us your questions and business inquiries there.
And if you want to talk to me, you can find me on Twitch, Instagram, or Twitter, just by searching Codenbon. Typically, if you want to catch me live on Twitch, it's Thursday evenings, and just watch out for the notifications either on Instagram or Twitter for me going live there. And our intro and outro themes were composed by Alistair Shorman, and he can be found at alistairsounds.wixsite.com/alistairsounds. And our transition music was composed by Christian Walker, and he can be found at christianwalkermusic.com.
All right, this has been the Ebon Hawk Podcast. May the Force be with you. We'll be back soon. Bye for now.